You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast that showcases the research currently being conducted at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law in Freiburg, Germany. My name is Christopher Murphy, and I'll be sitting down with researchers to talk about their projects, the various methods they use, and how their findings have impacted legal, criminological and psychological research in Germany and abroad. All this and more on Doing Time, Talking Crime. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to what is actually the first ever episode of Doing Time, Talking Crime. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about good old-fashioned bar fights, with a particular emphasis on the emotions and heated decisions that can lead to them erupting. However, this time we're going to be adding a virtual reality twist to the subject matter in order to better understand what exactly goes on in our heads during such encounters. And to do so, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Timothy Barnum. Tim holds a PhD in criminology and criminal justice from the University of Nebraska and has been working at the Max Planck Institute since September 2020 in the Virtual Decision-Making Lab. Welcome to the program, Tim.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So, Tim, before we talk about the actual methods involved in the virtual reality bar fight, and I should add that that's a working title, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the aims of the project? I gather you're interested in measuring emotions and behavioral triggers.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job with that overview, but generally speaking, what we're interested in is this idea that, what are the decisions, what are the factors that go into decisions to committing crime, kind of broadly speaking. And in a traditional research sense, what we're looking at is, people are deciding whether or not they want to commit a crime.
Right.
There's two broad things that go into this decision calculus. Typically, you're weighing the costs of the potential crime, right? What can go wrong in the situation? What are the chances you get arrested, get injured, these sort of things, and you're weighing that against potential benefits, right? And
but this is when you're rationally thinking about things.
Yes, and this is the idea, right? So when you're rationally thinking, you're able to go through this kind of cost-benefit analysis. Yes. But we know from outside of the field of criminology, in psychology and econ, they've really established that emotions also are another factor that goes into this decision calculus, and specifically it can kind of bias the way that we're thinking things, or at least shade our judgments, and you start looking at it through an emotional lens. For example, if you're feeling fear in the moment, your response is fear in a situation, perhaps you become a little bit more pessimistic and you start judging things to be a little bit riskier than maybe you would in a cool state, right? Whereas, anger and other emotions like sexual arousal are what people have called drive states. And so these can lead to additional motivations towards like a goal-oriented type behavior. Right. And so what we're interested in then is looking at how these different emotions shade people's judgments of a risky situation, like you said, in this case, in a bar fight situation, and how they interpret that situation, and then how that leads to them to behave maybe differently than if they were in what you would call like a cool state where you're calm and collected.
Right. I see. Okay. So you're looking at these emotions, and that's, I guess, the question next would be, what do you expect to find?
Right. So, and that's where, part of this answer will blend into the methodological stuff we can talk about.
We'll touch on that next. Exactly.
But so the idea is that it's kind of an intuitive answer, right? Obviously, if, someone's provoking you in a bar, you become angered towards them naturally. That's going to motivate feelings towards animosity towards that. Exactly, right? Whether you follow through with that behavior or not, right? That's where kind of what we're going into is trying to look at. But the idea that, I think what we expect to find is when people are feeling this intense anger as a result of provocation or as a result of these other actors or people in this situation, that's going to change how you would feel or evaluate maybe what are the chances I would get arrested if I hit this person, or what are the chances I get injured myself, right? Whereas maybe, in a fearful state, you may be more afraid of your bodily harm.
Right.
Right. So really comparing specifically those two emotions, and then ultimately seeing how, if we're manipulating the scenario or the situation that these people are engaging in these situations, can we manipulate their emotions, and can we manipulate their interpretations or judgments of that actual scenario, right?
Okay. So that's and what do you expect you might come out in the end? I mean, is it too early to say yet, or?
Well, just based on prior research, what really seems like what we're going to find is that when people are feeling this sense of emotional arousal, specifically anger, they're going to feel more confident in the situation. They're going to feel more in control of the situation, and it's going to lead to higher. And again, we're not actually measuring real behavior, because we'll talk about that again, right? It's virtual reality, but we're guessing they'll report higher intentions that if they were in that scenario, they would engage in a fight.
Okay.
Right? They would be more willing to not worry about the costs necessarily and focus on the benefits. That is goal-oriented, making this person pay for the provocation. Exactly.
Okay, I understand.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Tim, the study design, we've got a slick, drunken guy, an attractive female in need of the subject's assistance. It could be argued that this is kind of perpetuating certain stereotypes. Why is it? What's the scientific justification for the study design?
You know, that's a really good question, because obviously whenever you're studying sensitive topics like violence, right, or victimization, of course you always have to be very careful and really think through it from a scientific standpoint. But really the idea here, and what we're most interested in, is understanding not only just the causes of violence, right, or the causes of why certain people might be higher at risk of being victimized in these more emotional settings, but also how people are interpreting it, right? Because, you know, unfortunately with, a lot of research designs, for example, interviews where you're talking about things retroactively, a lot of information can be lost, or in just generalized surveys with decontextualized measures, a lot of information gets lost. So there's not a lot of a deep understanding of those in-the-moment mechanisms that both lead people to become kind of enraged and think maybe irrationally or behave, somewhat irrationally. But also, just as importantly from a scientific standpoint, is how other people in those scenarios are reacting to witnessing that type of behavior, right? Because you always hear about these issues of intervention and bystander effects. So I think what we're really aiming to do from a scientific and hopefully eventually a policy standpoint is both understand what leads to these types of behaviors in these different settings that are both social and emotional, such as a bar setting, but also, how people are reacting to these, and then hopefully how we can respond to them from a societal level going forward, right? Because, in general, when we're studying this type of emotional and aggressive and violent behavior, yes, we situate it in a bar setting, and we do have, the slick guy and this kind of stereotypical roles of how, because again, it's for college age students, right? So we want them to feel like they're in a natural setting so we can get a natural response to this setting, but hopefully we can generalize this to other types of emotional and risque type of behavior, interpersonal violence, domestic abuse, all of these types of things that are all emotionally charged. So again, it's really just trying to get at the closest we can get to the mechanisms that are actually leading these types of responses. Does that help?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast by the Max Planck Institute for the study of crime, security, and law. So, Tim, I guess now we've talked a little bit about what you're trying to measure in the project. I'd like to now look at how you're going to measure it. Based on, I guess, your working title, it sounds like you're getting a bunch of people together in a bar, putting some virtual reality headsets on, and then throwing virtual punches and kicks at each other. Tell me, what's really going on?
Yeah, so kind of a backdrop to it first is, I gave you the overview of what we're looking at. It's like emotions and behavior, and it's kind of a no-duh, right? Obviously, in a bar setting, if someone's, calling you names or provoking you or whatever, you're going to feel emotions, right?
Yep.
And honestly, surprisingly, there's not a lot of research on emotions in crime, at least state affect, like situation-based emotions on crime. And that's what's going to lead us to this topic on this methodology. But the idea behind it is that it's really hard to study this.
Yes.
Right? So there's a number of issues when it comes to studying crime in general, specifically in the moment, heat of the moment crime. number one, ethics reasons, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Very well can't just have people. We can't throw them into an environment and tell them to commit crime, right? That's illegal. That's unethical. People can get hurt. You can't do that.
And they'd still be acting rationally then anyway, because you're telling them to do something,
well, exactly,
right? I mean,
right? So then it's not even natural behavior to begin with. So that's exactly. And then the other way people have tried to go about this issue, which it's not necessarily flawed, it's the closest we've been able to get thus far, is, we have hypothetical written vignettes, and you'd give it on a survey, and someone would read that situation, and in this case, depicting what I'll talk about here is, someone, you're at a bar with your friends, and someone spills your drink and then blames you and pushes you. How would you respond?
Right.
Or then they would ask perceptual emotional questions, which is, how would you feel in this situation? Right? So again, it's getting closer to the real thing, right? But in a written scenario, you can't see what's happening. You have to imagine it, right? And so you can impute different things. I might imagine something totally different than you imagine, right? So there's a lot of noise that gets introduced into this. So virtual reality now, coming full circle here, is a methodology that, when used correctly, can appropriately allow us to look at, these real world, ecologically validated from getting scientific, or just a naturalistic setting where these crimes would occur. And then you can put these people who would normally be in this setting anyway in a virtual version of it. And then we can start to get at more realistic way that they're starting to behave without necessarily violating some of those ethical bounds, right? So that's the motivation behind virtual reality.
Okay, that's and that's why you at the Institute you're using the virtual reality now, because it offers new opportunities to move away from paper pencil vignettes and
let's see how these people are reacting in a real world situation. That's not quite real world.
That's right. Well, you pick up on it there, the situation or the scenario. Talking before, you told me before the program that there's kind of two scenarios you've got at the moment. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about that and how they're meant to trigger emotional responses?
Yes, exactly, because that is obviously the goal, right? So what we're doing is, and another caveat, just side point is, I think a lot of times when people think virtual reality, and rightfully so, they're thinking like computer game, like maybe even old school, where it's kind of like clunky a little bit and pixelated. But so what we're doing is a spin-off of this. It's 360 virtual reality or 360 video, in which we're actually using real people, real actors in a real physical environment, so in a real bar, and they're acting out a situation around a camera that captures 360 degrees simultaneously.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're creating a movie set, if you will. It is.
An interactive movie, so to speak. Right. And so then when eventually the participant goes to put on the goggles, their point of view, which we call them the POV then, is from that camera. And they can look around, so they don't have to pay attention to what's happening in the scenario. They can look around, they can... So they're not moving about necessarily in the environment, but they are able to engage in wherever
so
they're
not passive, but they can't necessarily interact.
Yeah, so the interaction is... it's the video's linear, right? It's going to happen regardless of whether they're paying attention. So that's what makes this such a intense project, is we really have to have these cues be so realistic that the person couldn't possibly ignore it.
Because otherwise they could be looking elsewhere in the virtual environment.
Theoretically, yes. Someone could be faced backwards during this whole thing. So, so to the scenarios themselves, what we've done is we're interested in two potential outcomes, so to speak, right? So we have just flat out, someone's provoking you. Would you fight this person under these circumstances? And then the other one is another kind of precarious situation of you have an interaction with an attractive female, and these will be a only male sample, a young male sample, right? And so they'll see this attractive girl, then be approached by what we're calling the slick guy, who proceeds to flirt with her, and it escalates. And so then as a witness of this, so then that's an intervention outcome. So you have a fighting outcome and an intervention outcome, which that can also include some sort of physical violence. as well.
I see. Okay. And tell me a little bit more about the fighting outcomes. Right?
So how we're doing it is, and I'll use just the terminology that we've been using just to make it consistent. Person comes in, they sit down in the environment, and they'll be told, all right, you're waiting for your friends.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go to a concert. They're running a little bit late. It's raining outside, so you go into the bar to wait for them and have a beer. You sit down, you order, you have a beer.
Okay.
So then the scenario pick up, and they're looking around. They have a chance to kind of get immersed into the environment, start to feel like they're actually there. And as they're looking around, one of two things can happen, but we'll start with down the violence path first. And that's where the prime is initiated, and that's what we're calling it. So the first couple minutes will be what we're randomizing in order to start to provoke the emotions. And so what happens is a Pitbull song, actually. I'm pretty sure that's what we are ending up using.
Okay.
So it kicks on, and then an actor who's sitting at a table that you're faced out towards the crowd that you can clearly see starts dancing, getting obnoxious, and he's rudely is announcing that he needs to get another beer. Right? So he kind of dances up to the bar. When he gets to the bar, he burps. He burps really loudly. It's so funny to think, because when you're actually in there, you're like, whoa. But so he burps, and he's just extremely rude. Even kind of makes a little jab at the POV, like, what are you looking at? Like, find me attractive type of thing, you know? So just being provocative for apparently no reason. And so then that scenario, or that version of the scenario, ends right there.
Yes. Okay.
All right. And so then there's going to be a seamless flow for this, where the POV turns and is engaged with the bartender who's going to serve him again. And then behind you, this person has left. Right? So they're behind you now, and then all of a sudden you hear loud noise, which is again to prime the person to turn back around. Yep. And witness what's happening. And in this case, you see the person who's just obnoxiously there has just ran into somebody, but you don't know what happened. We're leaving it ambiguous to see what people's interpretations of the situation could be.
Gotcha.
But glasses break on the floor, they spill, they kind of jar back and forth, and that's when that kind of fizzles out a little bit, and then the person comes back to the bar.
The antagonist,
At this point now, not before they were just rude and goofy. Now they're in a bad mood. Trousers are all wet. I need a new beer, like this. And then they take offense to the person staring at them, the POV, who presumably will have obviously wanted to follow that person back to the bar, right? And at that point, the person, makes a few remarks, reaches over, steals that person's beer, chugs it in their face, and challenges them to a fight.
I see. Okay.
And so this would be one option where we could end this scenario, and then that's where we could engage with questions like, what would you do if you were in this situation? Is this person really trying to cause a fight? Would you fight back? Would you push back? What are the chances you would get injured if you fought? What are the chances you get arrested if you fought? And those types of more cognitive-based questions. Because all along, and we wanted to talk about how we're going to capture these emotions.
That's right, dude.
And that's where we're going to do some physiological heart rate monitors.
So the subject or participants will be kind of wired up.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then you can look at like sweat on their palms, and then obviously we'll do other things like eye tracking and other types of indicators. So if their emotions are running, their heart rate will be spiked, and that's kind of one at least non-perceptual, and we will ask how they felt too after the fact.
But that's when you take them out of the
and
virtual environment and then ask them
how
the
did
questions.
that actually make you feel, and then hopefully that corroborates their heart rate that's spiking all over the place,
And are these systems something that you have to build yourselves, or is this
that's kind of like an outsourced problem? None of us necessarily have that kind of expertise, but that's the beauty of collaboration with other disciplines too.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay. And the second scenario, that's
so it's very similar. Well, I mean, I guess it's not very similar. It's same setting, right? It starts the same. You're told you're waiting for your friends, so you get a beer. And this one, the prime version starts, And so I can explain this later too. We can interchange these primes to see if they have like cross influences on the different scenarios.
Okay.
But so the main prime for the what we're calling the sexual arousal one is a very attractive girl who's kind of dressed up really fancy because they're celebrating her birthday with a group of friends. She comes to the bar. Initially, she's talking on the phone. She's making kind of googly eyes at the POV point view, clearly getting his attention, and then orders drinks, a round of shots or something like that for her table. In the process, there's some flirting going on.
Okay.
You know, it's not over the top.
I was going to say, because it's only kind of a one-way street in this regard, right? I mean,
so we can't have it. And that's another thing. You can't ever have questions asked or any true interactions, right? So everything has to be done. The script took forever to write in that sense. But so she's flirty. She leaves, and we'll have her intentionally leave a couple drinks there. So she takes them back to the table, and that's in the time there that you're interacting with the bartender, and then she comes back to get the rest of the drinks, and that's where Slick Guy comes in.
He makes an appearance in this one as well.
He intercepts her at the bar, kind of has her pinned down, but not aggressively. And so, again, we'll have it be where we can cut it at different points. So the first it'll be, you could cut it right there. Is he being aggressive? And theoretically, you've had these interactions with this girl. Maybe you would be more inclined to take her side because of it versus someone who maybe didn't see that initial prime. Right. And so then she kind of flirty at first, it's supposed to be ambiguous at first, and then it progressively gets to where he's being more and more inappropriate to the point where it ends the scenario with him he has his hands on her in an inappropriate way, and she's saying no. Right? Saying, please leave me alone. And then at that point, kind of makes a helpless glance to the POV, and we could stop it there and ask about intentions to intervene. And we'll also have an additional aspect of that where then that Slick Guy turns to the POV and becomes an aggressor himself. So we could also measure it that way as well. So
that's pretty intense here. Your film.
And it's okay. Maybe describing it, it's always hard. Like, would this really work? I could totally see someone skeptical thinking that. We did do a practice shoot. Where it was like completely like, super simplistic version of it, right? You could see the wires of the cameras and stuff everywhere. There's no one in the bar because when we plan to do this, we're gonna have a full pack bar. So it's gonna be like you're 100% in like on a Friday night. Everyone's out having a good time.
How many actors are roughly involved in the project?
What's that?
How many actors are going to be involved in the project?
I think there's 6 main actors. Right, and then there's because it's. For the prime, we're going to have 2 girls playing that role. So some people might get the girl from the prime that is also in the scenario, and some people get a completely different girl.
Part of
right, so we can see if
that'll... This madness,
exactly, right.
About this
is there a stronger emotional attachment to the girl when you've already had an interaction with her?
Great.
And same thing with the aggressing male in the fight scenario, right? Some people will get a version of the guy who is antagonizing you at the beginning and is in the scenario that you were tasked with fighting, versus some will just be antagonized by someone different.
A completely different guy.
And again, same idea, right? What's that emotional attachment? So we have those actors, bartender. And
then a whole lot of extras, obviously.
And then the rest is just going to be, I think it'll probably be up to like 80 people.
Oof.
Present. Maybe 50 are involved in the scenario, and then the rest of the crew and everything else. So.
Okay. And I think you said to me beforehand that you're shooting is it Amsterdam? Or?
Yep, we're shooting in Amsterdam.
Okay. With the local kind of, are the actors from there, or are they from Germany?
So the actors at this point are going to be from Germany. We're in that process right now.
The extras as well?
No.
Okay, so the extras will
those can be
local,
because that doesn't.
Okay.
They're just mainly there for the background noise and the sense of being in a real bar. Because it would be weird if you were having this interaction with an empty bar. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. This question here, I guess, has not such a technical question, but one I'd like to ask about. When you think bars, you think bar fights, you naturally think alcohol. And I know it has nothing to do with the virtual environment. That would be quite interesting, I'm sure, if you gave your participants beforehand a couple of beers in real life, and then to look at how they then react in the VR situation. Have you thought about that?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't think about violence that's happening in a bar, right, or any type of bar-based behavior without having that consideration of alcohol, right? And 100% we would expect that would have an effect. So we're thinking, after the potential proof of concept studies, right, after having people go through, making sure that, it's a realistic scenario, we're getting what we would expect to find as far as immersion, as far as emotional reactions, then absolutely, I think one interesting thing we want to do, so in our lab, we are building a bar. So they'll be actually at a physical bar. So it kind of makes them feel a little bit more like they're there so they can turn around. But then, having some participants actually drink alcohol.
Take in a few beers beforehand. Then.
Absolutely. And, theoretically, then you'd probably expect that as alcohol intake goes up, emotional reactions go up, right? As your kind of inhibitions go down. And I think another interesting aspect that we could do with this, and we'd be taking this scenario and these environments out into the real world and recruiting people at bars, right? Recruiting people from off the street, essentially, to come and take these. Sure.
Work
through the environment, give us the types of answers. Then we can ask them questions like, how much have you had to drink approximately today? Right? Or how much have you been drinking? How much drugs and alcohol in general, you can ask those types of questions. All things that 100% should factor into,
I see.
what we're looking to find. So, again, that definitely will be something. That'll be maybe our next conversation. We can talk about that.
That's right, exactly. So, groovy. Okay. I guess a few quick questions at the end now. How large is the sample?
Well, I mean, obviously that depends, but given that we do have pretty complex design, we have multiple avenues that we could manipulate. So, you would want to get, I would say, no less than 200-300 people. So, it'll be probably a prolonged experience collecting all of this data, but we plan to recruit from the local university to start.
Here in Freiburg.
Yep, here in Freiburg, just because in general that's tends to match the population demographic that we're interested in, which is, people who go to bars. Right?
Language-wise, I didn't ask that before. Is it in German or is it in English?
So this will be in German.
It's in German. Okay,
yes.
right. Okay,
and maybe at some point we might make another one with English.
Not with subtitles.
Now with subtitles.
Could destroy the virtual.
And other versions that have been created in the past that we are building off of, they've kind of dubbed over voices, and that still never looks as good. But so it'll be a German sample.
First a German sample. Okay, all right. And you said age-wise, then we're looking beginning 20s until 30s, I guess. If you're looking at a student population.
Right. Yep. And then maybe if we were able to go out into the actual bar scene and collect data, then you get even more diversity then in that sample, which always is a plus when you're trying to figure out, who's affected by these things and how. So,
and speaking diversity, at some point you could do a female sample, obviously.
Yeah, and we have talked about that because it's definitely 100% designed for like a male going into it. Your standard.
Okay, so you've written the
stereotypical way, but there is room for, a female to go through this scenario as well and give her interpretations of the scenario, whether it be about if you were a male, how would you act in this type of question? Or, at least with the sexual harassment version of it, why wouldn't a female be able to intervene in such a situation or have an emotional reaction to that? So, it's definitely, there are possibilities for that. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Final question, I guess, is the timeline and the next steps. I know you've been roughed up like all of us by COVID.
I mean, we were supposed to shoot this in December of last year, so obviously that has not happened, but, it is what it is. So right now we have as, I guess, definitive date as we've had in a while of June 29th to do the initial day of filming. And so we're in the process of getting the actors,
Okay.
figuring out what it'll take to get them from Cologne or Berlin or wherever we end up getting them from, and into Amsterdam, and then from that point, I think it's 2 days of filming, 1 day of kind of figuring stuff out,
Cutting,
1 day
editing,
of filming,
whatnot,
finalizing stuff, and then it's a few weeks of getting that ready to go, and then, theoretically we can hit the ground running.
And then you got to hit the ground running and find your sample here, and so and is there an we talking then if we come back again next year, you think you'll be able to present results then on the project?
I think we definitely should be able to do that. At the very least, something preliminary.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I'm getting antsy, so
we're
really excited, and
I well understand. Yeah,
it's just such a fun project, and
Yeah, that's right. Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on today, telling us about the virtual reality bar fight project. Wish you all the best for the filming, and don't get punched.
Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to today's program. If you would like to hear additional podcasts or learn more about our research, please visit our website at www.csl.mpg.de.